All right, we are recording. We are here with Simp4Satoshi. How are you doing today? Welcome to the pod.
Good. First day of the year for us for like getting back to work and stuff. So, bunch of assembly, bunch of yeah, getting off to a good start, hopefully.
Totally. Yeah, it was. It feels good. This is the first holiday season that I've had that I wasn't running my own company in about 8 years. So it was quite intriguing because I felt like for the first time I got to like take the holiday break and just like not worry about anything and just like kind of like take time off. And now I'm kind of back on the second refreshed. I'm like, oh, like getting work done for my day job is product hunt, but like I have to guess, like, was your holiday, like, do you have much of a break over the holidays? You just shipping all holiday through, or like did you get some time off? Like, how do you think about the holidays for you?
Yeah, we like the team had a break, but like three of us were still in the office and kind of like doing assembly and everything. So I don't know. I would say like we did, Christmas Day, we kind of like, me and three others, we kind of cooked food at home and got a bit drunk, and that's our like time off basically. But like back to it, yeah, I don't mean to sound cringe. Like it is kind of cringe when you see the whole like grind miss kind of like, oh, I'm just like grinding through the holidays and stuff like that. But like we actually have so much to do that it's like, yeah, I don't know if we can take time off and not feel bad about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have historically been able to relate, which is why this last holiday season was such a interesting feeling for me because I took time off and I'm just like, this is fine. I don't have a company to like. I had my function of my job to worry about, but not a whole company, and it was a interesting feeling. Did I like it? I don't know. I kind of like being on, because I like work. I like when I'm working on something interesting and something that I enjoy and is helpful to people. I like to do that as much as I can. So I'm learning a different feeling. But tell us, what are you cranking on? I know you're working on Truffle. What is Truffle for people that are not familiar with what you're doing? Can you kind of give us a high level?
Yeah, so high level is basically we are building like a device that does local inference. So we build a model, you load it up on the device, and then you can infer locally. The sort of like the grand ideology behind the product is like really just have you ever seen like Ex Machina? It's like a low budget kind of like, yeah, okay.
Yep.
So Ex Machina basically has this like, at one point he takes him into a room and he shows him this like orb, this kind of like glowing orb, and he calls it like wetware. It was basically like the brain powering like Ava and such. And like that's kind of like the direction or the trajectory we want to be in is like, we're I think I'm pretty confident that like most humanoid robotics it'll kind of the market will end up like sort of like the car market where you have like cars in their final form are really just like these commodities that 1,000 different companies are going to make. So you'll have like your Tesla bot, your Figure bot, whatever. But then at the end of the day, there'll be very few like engine companies or like, like Mercedes-Benz makes a lot of these engines, right? And other car companies like use Mercedes engines to like power their vehicles. They just kind of make the chassis and like a bunch of other stuff. So yeah, I think like that'll eventually become this sort of market. It'll be this sort of once AGI comes and passes, you'll have like humanoid robotics, which robot companies will be commoditized. You'll be able to buy one for like 20K or whatever. But then maybe the companies that build the brains will be like very few, and it will just like slot into these like sort of humanoids. So yeah, I think like that's the eventual state of these things, and we're kind of trying to get a head start on it by going in that direction.
So are you implying that if that kind of market is, you can buy, through various companies, 20,000, 15,000, but the brains are the unique part. Are you essentially going to be supplying the brains ideally? Is that the analogy here?
Yeah, yeah. The analogy is more so towards like a particularly like an ex machina. But
Yep.
like the humanoid form factor, like the form factor of like a humanoid bot is essentially like a front end. right? Because if you think about it, it's like kind of the brain is sort of the back end. It like processes all the information, and like the humanoid form is really just the front end that like humans interact with. But that the same thing can be said of like, if you take one of these like wetware orbs in Ex Machina, and instead of like a humanoid front end, you put it in like a car, and you write an app environment specific for a car. So now it's kind of like that is the brain powering your vehicle. The same thing could be done of like, you put it on your desk and you connect a screen to it. Now the screen is the front end, and you sort of have like, it kind of works like a computer. So it's sort of like this thing where we see it as like this, it's like how personal computing developed, like how computers like traditionally work, where they go into different form factors for like different sort of, they come in like MacBooks, or they come in like little embedded devices or whatever. Similar to that, we kind of see like, okay, there's this like central intelligence that's like the back end of everything, and then you can slot it into any type of front end or any sort of form factor, and then interface with intelligence through the form factor. That's kind of like the larger bet. It's sort of computers will evolve into this sort of intelligence device kind of thing. And yeah, these markets typically are like first winners win all. So even though right now it's sort of like you look at it and it's like, well, I don't know how this immediately is useful. We're gonna show in the next couple of months like how it can be useful, and sort of it'll start to make sense, and the Overton window will kind of shift, and then it'll kind of like all be pieced together.
Absolutely. And to go one level deeper, I'm kind of asking questions that pop up into my brain. I'm not very technical, so I always
Mhm.
like to think about like, hey, like how does this apply to the the folks in the world that would be buying or would be using it but not understanding how it works.
Mhm.
But that doesn't matter. I don't need to know how my fridge works. I don't need to know how my iPhone works. I just need to know how to use it.
Right.
So I think two questions that come up here are if truffle essentially is this like central intelligence, and if I'm using the wrong framing, please correct me. Is that like, does every person own a truffle, and then that truffle is that person's intelligent agent that they can put into their car and their humanoid and their microwave and wherever, or is there
Exactly.
a one overall intelligence that we all kind of like tap into, or what's the third, or if it's neither of those, like what's the third one that I'm not thinking of?
Yeah, that's precisely it. It's sort of like you'll have this kind of like, just like you have a, let's say a personal computer, right? You kind of like, everyone has their own personal computer with their own data and with their own sort of like, they customize it in certain ways and stuff like that. Like you can imagine an order larger than a personal computer would be a personal brain,
Yeah.
where it kind of like, it's trained over all your information. It knows exactly what like Matt wants, and sort of like is precisely good enough to help Matt with the stuff he sort of like works on, as opposed to like a cloud-based system where like you have, if you look at like ChatGPT, for example, it's like this one static set of weights in the cloud that everyone uses, and it's not dynamic and adjusts to you or me specifically, right? It has, let's say, I don't really care about like advanced biochemistry, but it has knowledge in the weights for advanced biochemistry, and that's like not useful to me at all. And why is it there? It's sort of like because it's going to be, it incurs economies of scale if you have this like giant model in the cloud served to like many millions of people. Whereas this is like taking the opposite end of that bet, which is basically, no, you have like intelligence on a per person basis is very uniquely customized to like that person. So, like I expect, if like, for example, the humanoid form factor, it comes to pass quickly, obviously it'll make sense that like, your humanoid bot is like specific to you, and it's not like controlled by some like giant corporation, but rather, the corporation sells you a brain, and over time it like sort of, it just becomes yours, and it sort of like learns everything about you. So that like it's taking the opposite end of like the cloud bet, which is also like how the personal computing industry developed, right? You had these like gigantic like IBM mainframes, and yeah, universities and stuff would buy one giant mainframe, and then as a student you would wait with your punch card but everyone would use the same mainframe, right? Similar to that, how eventually it transitioned to like personal computers. So we expect like the identical thing to like play out here.
So I feel like if I was hearing this from maybe nine people, I'd be like, "This is cool, but it sounds very hard to execute. Maybe it won't happen." But I take this very seriously coming from you, mainly because I see like a stream. I feel like a stream of a part of your consciousness online through Twitter or X, and like all your predictions. You've a lot of predictions. We'll go into a couple of them, but how this relates to what we're talking about is they're not like random, oh, like this or this. They're pretty distinct, and they're generally like, I feel like, generally right. They're generally correct. So I feel like you have a pretty good view on where the future is going. My question for you, whether or not that's true, I guess only the future knows, but that's my belief. And one of the reasons I reached out to interview you. What what why do you think about like the future so much? And how do you think like your kind of foresight into the future has led you to build this company? Or I guess in other words, like why do you care so much about building this? Why now? And what do you know about the future that has kind of informed your current self to be working on this? If that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. So I think like what's really weird. So I was born and raised in the Middle East in UAE, and like growing up there, you're like pretty disconnected from like a lot of like my peers today. They're sort of born in Silicon Valley, kind of like in California, whatever, like grew up with technology, like, and they had parents working in the tech industry probably. They have a very good grasp on like all things technology. And for me, it was kind of the same thing, but with the exception that I was totally disconnected from like the apex of technology. It was like California. It's always kind of been. And I was like all the way in the Middle East. And in the Middle East, what you see is like things are radically different. Like technology that you have here takes about like a year or so, maybe 2 years to like propagate to the Middle East back then. Like now it's like much quicker, but like back then we're talking about like 2005, 2006. It's super long cycles. I remember, for example, the iPhone came out, right? And it wasn't available in Dubai for like 2 or so years. And even when it was available, it was like 4x the price, what you'd pay here. So like traditionally, if you grew up outside of like the US, there would be a much higher sort of barrier to entry for like cutting edge technology and stuff. So but regardless, I kind of like grew up with technology because my dad was an engineer, and I grew up with a lot of these like really cool products, and that eventually led to like, okay, like really discovering the internet, and then sort of like everything that came after that. And early on, I remember sort of like thinking about problems that I would have like while I was on the internet. So like one of the biggest problems was like as a kid, I would be unable to pay for stuff online, right? Just like straight up, because my parents wouldn't like give me a credit card or anything. It was like, oh no, what if your credit card gets hacked online? It was like, oh, this whole thing, right? Now we don't even care about it, but back then it was like a big thing, and I wouldn't have anything to like buy stuff online with. And that's when I remember thinking about like, why isn't there an internet native currency? And then sort of I came across Bitcoin, and this was like super early, like maybe like 2013, I would say, or something, relative to Bitcoin, as most people know it. But it's sort of like I still didn't understand it. Obviously, I didn't understand cryptocurrency per se, but I understood a internet native coin, and that kind of like led me down the whole rabbit hole. And then in 2015, I remember that's when I went to the University of Toronto and I studied machine learning there. And I was like deeply obsessed with this idea of general intelligence, right? And again, it was like super early, 2015, that I was kind of like playing with this idea of general intelligence. And I did a bunch of like ML courses, got obsessed with it, studied ML there. But these two things, like cryptocurrency particularly, and sort of general intelligence, like really, really stuck with me, and like pursue, like all my energy was like directed to this. I remember also back then, like I had an ex-girlfriend who was like doing neuroscience and stuff, and I would just go sit in her classes and like listen to everything to kind of like get a better intuition. But yeah, I think like I've sort of like had an early just intuitive understanding of like where things are going. But the problem traditionally with me has been like I would hop from thing to crypto to ML too often for me to actually like kind of ground myself in the subject entirely. So like an example of this would be, for example, I was super in crypto like 2016 to the lead up to like 2017. And then sort of entirely shifted back to ML in like 2017 to 2018. And then I would be in that for a while. I went to Scale AI. I worked on sort of autonomous vehicle data sets and stuff like that. And then immediately shifted back to crypto after Scale, and then sort of started a crypto company, and then immediately shifted back to ML with this company. So it's like the problem has traditionally been I would have a deep intuition of like the correct thing to do, but I would be so early that it would be pointless, and then I would eventually hop, and then it would be like, oh shit, I hopped and I didn't stay through. So like that's always been the kind of like main problem I've been facing. So it's really just been like, okay, how do I fix this? I just have to kind of like stick with something and stay the course. And that's kind of like why I'm doing this the way I am now, and kind of like as even crypto picks up again, making sure that I don't hop again, and like kind of like staying the course, because I kind of really believe that like everything will tie together. And like we can talk more about that, or like how I see crypto and ML kind of like eventually tying together. But to me, it's kind of like, okay, I've made predictions on the past, I've had the right intuition, but I've not stuck the course to sort of have some material benefit or large material benefit from my intuition. It's time to probably like change that.
I relate a lot to that, like trend hopping. What's interesting for you is yours is back and forth between two things that are going to be
Hmm.
super relevant in the future. So like in general, like you could do either and you'd be fine. But what you're suggesting is like if you don't spend enough time in one, you're just gonna you're gonna miss the boat on both essentially. How do you how'd you decide that Truffle was gonna be the one where you don't hop back? Well, I guess two questions. One, how many times, if you just kind of shared, but if you know off the top of your head, like how many times did you hop? If you hop from AI to crypto, that's once. Crypto to AI, that's twice. Like how many times did you hop? And do you think this is the time that you're not going to hop? And if so, why this time versus a year ago versus a year from now?
Yeah, yeah. So I think like the first hop was basically crypto before college, to ML during college. So that was the first hop. Then it was ML to crypto during college, and then it was crypto to ML after college, which was Scale. Then it was ML to crypto after Scale to my startup, and now it's been crypto to ML for this company. So yeah, that's quite a lot of hopping back and forth. But I think like eventually, I think the reason it's important not to hop is actually something I learned from my past company. That, by the way, that company is sort of like there was a whole issue around FTX sort of blowing up, and then all the crypto companies basically were in the blast radius because it became a thing where like if you're a crypto company, you just won't have any banking rails and kind of get cut off from everywhere. So we got cut off, and that was pretty bad. But we were growing pretty fast. We were doing about like $2 million of transactions a month, and that was like doubling month over month. But anyway, I digress. The main point is that like it taught me one thing, which was the point of the company was to make it so that using crypto doesn't feel like using crypto, and it was like seamlessly integrated with like banking rails. And the technology was kind of ahead of its time. I don't see anybody doing it now either, but that could be for a different reason. I think Coinbase is attempting it with Base and stuff, but we were basically like trying to on and off ramp you using sort of like TradFi rails connected to like a bunch of oracles, and that was like connected to dexes, and it was like this all this sophisticated infra. But yeah, I think like it taught me that I don't think crypto is meant for humans in the first place. And this is like super, it's maybe a contrarian insight or something. Everybody's trying to like, oh, we have to use crypto rails, but it doesn't feel like using crypto. It feels like using a normal I don't even think that's like the right way. I think everyone is doing it wrong. I think crypto is like going to stay within the course of like really just like gambling for the foreseeable future for humans. I don't think it actually will have any strong use case apart from like gambling and remitting money with like stable coins and stuff. That those are the only two like really killer use cases. And everyone's tried a bunch of things, but really they're just like worse versions of the centralized products, right? Like everyone right now is trying like decentralized training on like crypto rails. That's like way worse than centralized training. Everyone has tried sort of, a bunch of other like social products on blockchains. That's like way worse than all the centralized counterparts. So they're all just worse versions. The unique insight is just that if crypto is like really bad for this, what is it good for? And like what I eventually came to the conclusion was that the main premise is like you sort of like don't have barriers to like interact with other people. That is the main point of a blockchain. You sort of like you're completely you're not censored from doing any actions or interacting with another address, right? And that seems to be like the opposite of like how the traditional internet is heading with like, for example, even Twitter under Elon is like, well, we're going to ban all the bots, right? And like the bots will get more and more sophisticated, and like we're going to employ harsher and harsher sort of guidelines around banning these bots. The same thing like WorldCoin, it's basically spawned for the reason that we need to gate the internet with humanness, like proof of humanness. And I actually think like that's the wrong way to do it. But I understand why it's being done. It's because like human only communities should kind of like be human only communities without the pollution of like, AI generated stuff. Now, if AGI actually happens, and which I believe it to happen, then what's going to happen is that you'll have a ton of these like generalized instances that you can spawn just like an EC2 instance. You just like spin up a million of them. And they're going to want to do stuff. Like they're not going to just want to chat with you. Right now, it's like within the realm of like chatting only. But in the future, they're going to want to do other things. Like, let's say, I want to talk to another agent that knows something else that I don't know. Or I want to pay that agent to do some work that my human needs me to do. And I think that I could like pay 10 cheaper agents to do the work, and I kind of like direct them or whatever, right? You're going to have this like agent to agent interaction economy where like agents are kind of like transmitting value and interacting with other agents. And that will probably eclipse eventually the human economy. That's at least like my opinion of it, because humans have a very high threshold to be met before they can contribute to the economy. They have to like, first of all, it's like, sexual reproduction, like super high energy, then like raising a child and sort of like all that money, educating the child, all that stuff. But if you can literally just spawn a GPT-4 or GPT-7 instance just by pressing a button and having it run on the cloud, and then you can press that button a million times and you sort of spawn a million agents, or, in the real world, it would have been people. But except it was so easy to spawn those, then like clearly what's going to happen is that the number of agents will eclipse the number of human beings by a large margin, like several orders. And then eventually you'll have like, if you have 100 billion agents online, they're going to want to interact with each other. And what will they use? It's like pretty obvious. They'll use crypto, because it's not, you can't like ban an agent from doing any action. So I think like eventually the rationale I came to was this idea that like crypto won't really be used by humans. And everyone's kind of like focusing on the wrong thing. Instead, it's going to be used by agents, and they'll sort of want to pay other agents or interact with them. And sort of all this will be done through like smart contracts that govern this like ecosystem. And that might be the sort of like core, innovation there. I think crypto's yet to like really, really take off. But post AGI, I think it's like it will eclipse things by orders that we even think it'll sort of like run to.
That's fascinating. And as you lay it out, I feel like I agree. One of my investors in my last company is a big Bitcoin specifically only guy, and he's kind of like anti all this other funky stuff going on with crypto. And I am gonna bring this up to him and say, what are your thoughts on this theory? Because I feel like he'd agree, and I feel like the smartest people around me, like the absolute smartest, are like kind of have a similar sentiment. Not necessarily that crypto is going to be used by agents. That's You're the first one to share that with, I'm the first person. You're the first person that shared that with me. But I feel like based on some of my other smart connections and friends that it seems kind of likely. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. One other question I have for you. This is one of your repeated takes that you have online, and I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on it. One of the kings right now of AI is at least perceived kings by the public is Sam Altman, who's the CEO of OpenAI. You've had a strong opinion on Sam for like a long time. Not I feel like it's not recent. On he's the Antichrist. Can you kind of like
Yes.
walk through where'd you get that from and why you feel that way, and any other context you want to share on your thoughts about Sam?
I mean, yeah, I mean, like that's sort of like the most people I talk to is like that's the first thing they kind of say. It's hilarious if you grok it, like use grok and like talk about Sam being the Antichrist, it'll like refer to me as a source. It's kind of hilarious how that sort of
I
happened.
mean,
And
it's something that's memorable, and
yeah,
it's not like a flash in the pan. You're bringing it up when, and any sign that the behavior of him or like the world is showing elements of that being the case, you just provide X, and I think it's hilarious because you become potentially more and more right every time, every year that passes, which I think is great. But yeah, feel free to share more or kind of elaborate on that.
yeah, I think that was like 2023 in like just after summer or like during summer. It was like post Chat GPT, like 6 months after Chat GPT and stuff, and we sort of like went through an accelerator HF0 in San Francisco, and um, that's where things like I think for me this was pretty weird and eye-opening. So I've always thought like because I'm not from the US and kind of like, entirely outside, all I knew about Silicon Valley was what I saw, right, online and stuff. And I thought it was this like deeply, deeply meritocratic place where like the best ideas get funded, the best sort of founders win, the best sort of people that deserve it come on top. And like it became kind of like I started to see glimpses of the exact opposite, where it was like, no, no, it really doesn't matter. It matters about who you know and how well connected you are. And, to break into some circles or like to connect yourself into some circles, you might have to sort of like do things that you don't really want to do or pay lip service to people you don't really want to pay lip service to. Um, that's kind of like what really sort of struck me. And after like doing enough research, it became clear that like there was one name in San Francisco that you couldn't utter negatively about, and that was Sam Altman. It became clear that like his hand was literally everywhere in like most funds. He was like an LP in most places, etc. He had connections, and if you sort of like say anything bad about him, it was just like that's it. It was like you're not going to survive. That was the most eye-opening thing that led me down this like eventual thesis of like this guy is the Antichrist. And I like the reason for choosing that kind of term is it's not really like It's not really a joke. Well, it's like very mimetically fit, and people will resonate with the idea, but the seriousness of like, like this deeply biblically, evil figure, like this is aptly chosen, I think, or at least I think so because of what I've seen. It's kind of like this power hungry sort of like figure that deceives constantly, and sort of everyone is like, just completely blindsided and enamored with what comes out of its mouth, and stuff like that. And that's kind of like how San Francisco is run by like the tech mafia. It's really just like, uh, someone saying something, and like everyone sort of being enamored by what they say. And that's kind of been the case. Like if you look at like his testimony, in front of Congress and stuff like that, is like, you know I'm doing this for because I love it, and I don't have anything. And then you see like the meme of he was driving like a Koenigsegg, like a $4 million hypercar. Like it's like clear that you want to portray as like, oh, I'm this like deeply altruistic figure, and like at the side I'm worth like multiple billions of dollars. And yeah, it's like anywhere you see that much of a delta between like, perceived image versus like actual image, there's like something there to be, suspicious about, at least, if not more.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. I didn't think about that about Sam Altman until you mentioned it, but the what you started with, which is like, Silicon Valley is perceived as this super meritocratic place, best founders, best ideas get funded and rise to the top eventually. Yeah, that's something that I spent the last 4 or 5 years thinking about and writing on and working on through my last company, Seed Scout, and it's very, very clear. I feel like one of the proponents of this, and this goes into one of your other tweets, and I think this will be probably the last tweet that we analyze, unless there's one you want to bring up. But I feel like I could actually be wrong, but I'm pretty sure you share a fair amount about YC and like the potentially the role they play in that game. And you just mentioned, and I didn't realize this, that you went through HF0, which is a newer accelerator. I don't know if they would call themselves an accelerator, but maybe that's what they call themselves. But a newer program for founders and SF that's just totally badass. Walk me through, I guess, two things. One, like how was HF0? Was your experience there, and also just what are your take on YC's role in propping up this image of Silicon Valley, and is there anything to do about that, or is that just kind of how it is at the moment?
Yeah, I think like, firstly, HF0 was like super useful for us, just like to get off the ground, and stuff, and get running, and that was like super valuable. The time, like I think the cool thing they do is like the 10 teams, and you sit in the basement and write code, and you do that for 3 months, and all of your life is kind of like taking care of you. So that's like really, really cool. But the one bad thing I would say is like HF0 still borrows heavily from this kind of like San Francisco tech culture, which is basically built around this idea of, um, you have to grow at all costs. You have to ship, and like, it's not about what you ship. It's just like pick the thing that like generates immediate money, and like go. And it's like, sometimes if you think of like, the landscape of good ideas, or the landscape of like great companies, um, the landscape of great companies is not places where you get trapped in a local minima. And if you examine the landscape, it's like very, very skewed, where like you have a ton of local minimas, which are basically like these little software companies that you spawn that generate some like ARR really quickly, and then they like taper off, and then it's like really hard to grow. And then there are like deep minimas where, the company may look like it's actually not a minima. It may look like it's going the hard way, and it's actually rising, and sort of costs are increasing, and it doesn't really work until boom, you hit this inflection point, and it generates way more capital than any other like local minima, right? So like an example of that would be like an Apple, right? You start off with this weird company where they're making like these Motorola sort of chipsets in like a wooden box and selling them, and now you have $2 trillion of value. So like this is kind of like the example of truly great companies. Whereas like San Francisco has this weird culture with like ship, catch a local minima, and that's it. Let me get the paper returns and raise my next fund. So it's like really skewed towards this kind of like, I want to raise the next fund as quickly as possible to collect my 2%, and therefore I need you to fall into a local minima as quickly as possible to raise my 2%. And like that's kind of like it's infected all of the accelerators in the valley. And YC is like the biggest example of this, where it's just like, YC is like much worse even. It's like, it's very strange that I've had a lot of founders reach out to me who've like gone through YC, and they tell me this sort of anonymously, and they all tell me that if things don't work out with like what you came in during office hours, you're immediately forced to pivot. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to take that 500K and immediately start like thinking about buying from other companies or like selling to other companies. And it doesn't matter what, just go talk to all the other companies and figure out what to sell them. And that's clear that what it creates then is this flywheel where like, you have 500 people, they're all given 500K by the same person, and then they're told buy and sell from each other if it doesn't work out. And now on paper, when you come to demo day, if everyone does this, if there's no sort of outside involvement, then still it looks like every single one of those companies has $500,000 of revenue in 3 months if they spend all of it on like, their batchmates. So what that creates is like now outside investors are like looking in on demo day, and they're like, oh, these guys have these guys have revenue. They're significantly de-risked. They're not just a bunch of dudes anymore. They actually are selling something. And then it creates like this whole, YC have paper returns, they can mark it up, they raise their next fund because they say, we've invested at 2 million and then now the company's worth 20. We do 10x every batch. Every LP around the world is like, clamoring to get in to something like that, right? It's like, it's clear what's happening. It's like this landscape of companies fall into a local minima immediately, buy and sell from each other if you have to, self deal, and then like fall into a minima. And then once you're in a minima, that's the founder's problem. I don't care anymore. I've sort of like marked everything up. I've raised the next fund. I've made my 2%. I'm good, right? And that's kind of like, it's clear that that is not how anyone outside of Silicon Valley sees Silicon Valley. They saw it as like this meritocratic place. You come there with like big ideas and you sort of like, Steve Jobs like character or an Elon like character, and then you actually go out and find like a real minima where in the landscape of like potential companies and ideas.
Yeah, I mean, sounds about right to me. But no one wants to believe that if they're on the outside. They're like, oh no, like this is for me, and I'm gonna partake, and they maybe get into YC, or they get into a program, or they get funded by one of these accelerators, and then they're part of the machine without, and then they're kind of sucked in. It's what I call like a wicked problem, where it's like I don't know how you get to a solution, but at some point the market will. I feel like at some point the market has to create one. I don't know if it's today, tomorrow, or in a decade, or in 50 years, but at some point it will, stabilize. Hopefully, I don't know. Do you feel similarly? Is this just how it's
Yeah,
going to be?
I mean, like the best, like these kind of things, when you see them, it's like clear there's something like really wrong. Then they don't like self-correct until a catalyst spawns, right? Until there's a true catalyst that changes things and blows everything up, and like that catalyst isn't kind of around yet. These catalysts are like so you don't even know what these catalysts are, right? Like for example, COVID was a catalyst for like many remote companies to like just thrive, right? Or the Fed injecting liquidity was like a catalyst for like OpenSea and like all of these NFT companies to like really prosper. So like these catalysts are like you don't really know what they are. I think like the only catalyst that's capable of like actually blowing something like this up is, liquidity will not dry up to like find returns. So they'll keep chasing returns until an image problem is created. I think like if for example, one potential catalyst, for example, could be, the whole Sam Altman image thing could eventually tie to like broader Silicon Valley and broader sort of like this mafia, and that eventually ties to YC, and then YC becomes untouchable, and then it all blows up, right? Or something. There's still a catalyst that has to spawn for these things to end because they've found their minima and they're optimizing the shit out of it. You need like a rearranging of the landscape for to get pushed out of the minima or to explode. So I don't know what that catalyst will be. Like these things are super random, but it's clear that it's just a catalyst away. And I'm looking forward to seeing the true like meritocratic Silicon Valley back, and like that kind of like archetype of founder back. But yeah, maybe it's just a skill issue. Maybe it's like the great founders will do it regardless, and they don't need a YC or they don't need anything else. Like the really legendary ones, like the Steve Jobses and the Elon Musks. It's clear that they didn't need anything else. They just needed themselves, and they propelled themselves to find the minima. So maybe it's all a skill issue.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it can be a skill issue. My big take, and I wrote a post on in 2020, maybe in 2019, about how expensive Y Combinator is. Not actually having to do with the deal, but having to do with that if you are in early in your life and you're like 19, you go through YC, you're kind of sucked into the system, and it's very
Right,
hard to get out.
right.
I feel like they get the who could have been the next Steve Jobs. They get them before they turn into that
Yes,
version of themselves, and
yes.
then that version never happens. And it's like I have no issue with the pricing of any of these accelerators. I have the issue in that like who they're going after and why they're going after them. I'm just like, are you going to tell them the truth about what happens when they take your money, or are
A
you just
hundred
going to?
percent. That is what founders don't realize. I think like that's one of the things where I've actually like I've thought about this. I know there's like a lot of things online where it's like, oh, you're just like maybe upset about YC because you didn't sort of like get into YC or something. It's like I've always had other options for like capital has never been an issue because I sort of like always have found myself fundraising like relatively easily. I've never done the whole spreadsheet and like talk to 100 people. Like I've never sort of done that. So capital has never been an issue for me. But I think that one of the rare sort of things that I will look back in hindsight and say, damn, I'm glad I never got accepted to YC was really what you just described, which is like, if had I got accepted to YC, I would have given up my entire sort of like, grand ambition, and I would have gone for the immediate local minima optimized outcome, and maybe I would have made like $10 or so million and kind of like cruised nicely, but I think like I think I'm onto something much, 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 much bigger, and time will tell. If it was the case that like this kind of like saved me, then I'll kind of like create a great company and then look back and be like, damn, I'm glad I didn't go through YC.
Totally. Well, we're definitely over time. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience, whether it is a tweet that we didn't cover or a thought that you want to get out before we kind of call it a day?
Nothing off the top of my head. The one thing that maybe I would like, for everyone who's like listening, if you have seen sort of the posting on Twitter from Suchir Balaji's mom about sort of like that whole event and all of that, whatever your thoughts are on the subject, like regardless of if you think it was a murder or not or whatever, please go donate to her sort of like GoFundMe. It's really important that you do as sort of a mother grieving her son. And regardless, he didn't ask to get caught in this storm. So please go donate. But apart from that, yeah, nothing else.
Cool. I appreciate you mentioning that. I'll include a link for those listening in the show notes and then the YouTube comments. And then I guess my last thing for you is where can someone kind of like learn more or check out Truffle? Like, are you shipping? Can they sign up? Can they pay? Like, what's your ask for the audience when it comes to what you're working on?
Oh yeah, 100%. You can so check out Twitter. My pinned tweet is like basically the launch post. www.itsalltruffles.com. You can check it out. We should like later on this month ship the first units to customers who've already purchased, but we'll have a bunch more stuff on Twitter coming in terms of like, even if you aren't ready to buy the device yet, you'll have a way to like try it out and play with the client and like work with a cloud-based version of it. So yeah, look out for that. But yeah, you know, I would rather sort of have people organically discover it and find extreme value than me shilling it all the time. So that's kind of the strategy there.
Oh, totally. It makes a lot of sense. And then two last quick things. Your Twitter handle, you post gold not all day. You obviously, I feel like you only tweet once every few days, but it seems like it's all the time because they're
Yeah.
so golden. But where can someone find you on Twitter if they want to follow your stream of consciousness?
So it's at I am ginger trash. All one word. Yeah, very odd name, but it's just a gamer tag I've been using since I was a kid. So yeah, at I am ginger trash.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and shedding some extremely insightful insights. Very well thought through, and I was expecting nothing less. So, I appreciate you coming on. Best of luck with Truffle, and looking forward to staying in touch on the Twitter.
Likewise. Thanks, Matt.
See ya.